Greetings, Black family. Are you interested to learn about Afrocentric paradigms and applying African solutions to African problems? Are you passionate about advancing the interests of Black people and to be a solution to the post-colonial problems we are confronted with as a people? If so, you are at the right place. I am Sandile Msibi, the founder and the president of Arise Black Child. At Arise Black Child, we are probing our post-colonial predicament and we offer direction for psychological and socio-economic emancipation. One of our objectives is to abolish miseducation that perpetuates distortion and mental oppression. One way we do this is by looking at our glorious history and draw pragmatic lessons which we use as a liberation agency. We also probe the current system and discuss possible Afrocentric solutions. Arise Black Child, in partnership with Ebu Kosini, brings you our unprecedented Black Education Masterclass. We will be hosting well-learned scholars in African indigenous systems and knowledge, as well as teachers who have been studying and working towards realizing the dream of Pan-Africanism. We have a vast spectrum of energetic youth and experienced elders that are passionate about creating a better Africa. We are a community of like-minded Africans around whom you can feel perfectly comfortable to be unapologetically African. We do this, like I said, to dismantle miseducation and epistemological distortion that perpetuates mental oppression. Like Bob Marley said, we need to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery because none other than ourselves can free our minds. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram at arise_black_child. Like our Facebook page, which is Arise Black Child. Join our WhatsApp group. We can't wait for you to be part of our ever-growing Black family. Harambe!
Good evening, Africa.
Hello.
Hi everyone. My name is Maikano Komane. I'll be your facilitator this evening. I reside in Johannesburg, but tonight I'm speaking to you from the beautiful village of Makoloko in the Northwest Province. It's about 15 minutes away from Marikana. I'm a volunteer, a member of the Arise Black Child, which I guess also makes me a family of Ebu Kosini Solutions. Yes, I'm a Pan-African and I find myself not wanting to be a spectator in the shaping of my destiny by some powers that be. So I want to take charge of creating my own destiny and understand Pan-Africanism as the only viable praxis that can help us collectively as Africans to achieve that. Yes, tonight we are supposed to have Sister Dineo Maboe. We have a slight problem. She's not going to be with us live due to unforeseen circumstances, but she was kind enough to send us a pre-recorded video. Currently, we are having a bit of an issue downloading that, but we will have it soon. So in the meantime, I can tell you a little bit about Sister Dineo. Dineo Maboe is a Tshwane-based intern clinical psychologist. After completing her master's in fashion business strategic in Italy, she joined the corporate world and applied her business skills there. Coming from a family of doctors, it was almost certain that her path was chosen. However, she was drawn to human rights and began an LLB degree. In later years, the ancestral call to re-specialize in clinical psychology drew her towards pursuing a master's in that field. Her mini dissertation research is focused on the lived experience of young Black female traditional healers in suburbia. It is in this interest and stories told by her grandfathers that made her question the viewpoint of her profession and its applicability to her fellow Black South Africans. Here's what she says. First and foremost, I identify as Motswana. It is more than a sense of belonging. It has shaped my values and outlook on life. I spent my formative years in the then Bophuthatswana before moving to white South Africa. One parent was brought up in exile while the other was raised in the same homeland I grew up in. My parents' respective upbringings and mixed ancestry geared me towards appreciating principles versus the isms that remain dominant in our society. It is this outlook that allows me to move around in different settings without prejudice and to have open-minded conversation with others. I'm naturally curious and interested in the world. The same outlook moves me to question everything, much to the eye of some. That's, yeah, a little bit about Sister Maboe. Okay, okay, the technical team said the video is still loading, so if you can give us a minute, please. I humbly apologize for that.
instrument that has been used is the mind of a European that is left-brained.
Yeah. Yes.
The left-brained, and I'll explain the left-brained part and the function that this emphasis, this highlight is serving to this discourse. And you may be asking yourself, what does white people being left-brained have to do with this? It has got everything to do with this. It has got everything to do with the schizophrenic society. I'm actually being lenient to even refer to us as a society because we have even ceased to be there. The European left brain had them developing a mind that fails to interweave things or find interweaving, interlinking to things that an African mind was able, to find those interweavings in. And because this left-brained European mind only knows how to engage in differentiating, because it is an out-of-balance cerebral spirit devoid cognition or spirit deficient cognition, because it only sees differences. That's what the left brain does. It recognizes differences. Because they are not balanced, they then become segregative. They segregate on everything in which they identify differences. Tina, in differences, we identify interweavings. We don't see separations in differences. That is why things that we could easily conceptualize as interweaved, they separated. That is why you have lawyers today who are trained in law, but who are so aloof, oblivious, ignorant to the fabric, chemistry, mechanics of the very society that the law purportedly is about ordering. But you have not studied it. And you study an instrument that is purportedly about ordering the society that you have never immersed yourself into studying its anatomy, chemistry, mechanics. Not only that, even going as far back as studying the mind that has engineered it, because that is also not innocent. Which university offers a course in social engineering? You know why there isn't? And there's only social sciences. The reason is social engineers themselves have social sciences as outposts, epistemological outposts, guarding the society that they've engineered from disintegrating. So that's why you only get exposed to social science, produced knowledge, produced and packaged knowledge. You are cut off from even identifying and analyzing the mind that has engineered the society that requires the knowledge that you were told you need in order to function within that society. Who created this society in the first place? If you understand the mind that created this society, you'll understand the content of the curriculum. Because what they are feeding you with is intended to entrench ideas that will set you on a path, that will land you on a destiny that is relative to the objectives of the social engineers. Sociologists are saying, societal norms. There's no such thing as societal norms. That's what the society has told you. The society never teaches anyone anything, because the society is a construct itself. The society is engineered itself. So, you need to understand the mind that has created the epistemological content in your various so-called disciplines. Disciplines are nothing but fractures of a mind that has been fragmented from conceptualizing things as whole, from conceptualizing everything as connected to everything. The fractures of that disintegrated mind now translate into disciplines. One fracture is disciplined from interweaving or from finding other fractures. That's why they are called disciplines. What discipline are you in? Meaning, what fracture of knowledge that has been disciplined from striking the connection with other fractures of knowledge are you in? That is what people are asking you when they're asking you, what discipline are you in? So there's no such thing as law, politics, dichotomy. If law is about maintaining and ordering order in the society, then the study of law cannot be aloof from the social, political, cultural preconceptions that have gone into the engineering of the society that law is about ordering. Are you following?
Yes, sir.
With the above statement as the backdrop to the present paper, looking into the world not only in terms of what is observable, but also what it stands on, it is contentiously submitted that law is nothing but an instrument of power.
Yes.
Crystallizing values predefined by either social consensus or imposed preconceptions of an hegemony. As principles, rules, legislative prescripts that, it is further argued, cannot be paradigmatically neutral to politics. Now, let me share you something from my current work, where I'm actually sharing an observation that will help you to see this epistemological holism that the African mind is supposed to be having in its engagement with knowledge, acquisition, dissemination, absorption, etc. In my upcoming literary offering, entitled Unshackled, Stepping on Toes, a case for the reorientation of African consciousness, pages 49 and 50 of the manuscript. But the work, the food is ripe in the pot. It's due for publishing. But I'm sharing with you, from the pot. I share the following observation in this work about power as a multidimensional phenomenon. Power is manifested and expressed multidimensionally. Firstly, the spiritual-cultural dimension of power, knowing yourself and developing a worldview that encapsulates your essence to ensure the emergence of an authentic being in your existence, giving our consciousness a directional aspect culturally. Gog Kani, earlier on, quoted Mama Marimba Ani as referring to culture as one's immune system. Very, 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 illustriously so. And it is a very salient point that she has made. And you think you should be doing anthropology and not law to be immersed into this. But people are intricately cultural. If you have consciousness, consciousness has to have directional aspect to it. And that is culture. Additional to it being your immunity, it is the directional aspect to your consciousness. It is how you cultivate and orientate yourself to existence. Culture is the perpetual trademark that you are giving yourself. That's how you mark your own vibrations once you have studied them, which will inform you what knowledge you will need and what purpose that knowledge is going to be serving. So we acquire knowledge without having identified the corresponding real need this knowledge is intended to serve, apart from money. So it is not really knowledge acquisition. Giving our consciousness a directional aspect culturally, this is the root of definitional power. Secondly, the educational dimension of power. By this I mean with the power to define, producing knowledge that responds to and serves values encapsulating our essence and our needs as defined in terms of such values, and establishing a systematic and institutional framework through which such knowledge could be preserved and disseminated. Thirdly, we have the political dimension of power. Here we talk about issues of governance for the maintenance of a properly organized and ran society. This is the administrative and coordinative aspect of power relations, politics. Let me repeat what I've just said, the last part of what I've just read. Politics. This is the administrative and coordinative aspect of power relations. That is why people with clashing coordinates in this regard are bound to clash, do not, correspond. Vis-a-vis power, we are bound to clash. Remember, coordinates serve, the function of helping you navigate to the intended destiny. Now, somebody else's destiny could be your subjugation. If my intended destiny depends on you being subservient to me, there will be clash of coordinates. And when there's this clash of coordinates, you call that power struggle. Or people who are lost in the illusion of abstract universalism. They would say things like, no, we were colonized purely for economic reasons. Yeah. This is just a struggle for survival. No, this thing is all over. Any people that finds itself in a survival mode would do that, would do what white people did to us. Do you know, this is the danger of abstract universalism. That deluding world of colorlessness, where people will tell you about the insignificance of race. When we have race problems, our problems are race problems. Class consciousness, class analysis, white poverty and black subjugation are not political commonalities. White poverty impels the sufferer to seek more money. But my subjugation impels me to engage in a war against those who have subjugated me. That last struggle analysis bull crap must be occluded from our mental universe.
Thank you.
We do not have political commonalities with non-Africans.
Yes.
You.
Of course.
And your comrades in Palestine included, for whom you pledge solidarity in your marches. And you have never said anything about your brothers and sisters in West Papua who are being brutalized by Indonesians. But you know how to march to the American embassy, to the Israeli embassy, against what they're doing to other caucasoids like themselves. Okay, and I felt I needed to sidetrack a little bit on that. It just came out strongly. Then you have, I spoke to the political dimension of power. Fourthly, you have the legal dimension of power. Let's talk about the legal dimension of power. This has to do with making laws that are reflective of the agreed values of the people, lest the system gets compromised with legitimacy crisis. If laws that are promulgated are not reflective of the agreed values of the people, the very first rule of law is violated. We do call that thing law. They have superimposed almost everything. I mean, my ancestor, William May Francis Creswell saying, when she speaks about white supremacy, she speaks about it, her diagnosis is on point. It permeates all areas of people's activity. Law is one of them. White supremacy. Law is one of the areas of people's activity that white supremacy has permeated. There is no such thing as legal thought. You must think like a law student. You must think like a lawyer. There's no such thing. Human mind does not function that way. An example, a classic example of schizophrenia among people who suffer from academitis is you hear a person, from the same subjectivity of their own mind, say, we engage we have a conversation on a subject, and you raise a point that I disagree with. At the same time, I say, yeah, but from the you coming with a sociological point of view, and I said, but from the psychological point of view, I would agree with what you have just said. But sociologically, what kind of this is a dichotomous mind. Strike a blow. And you look for schizos very far. You look for them very far. You don't see them in yourselves. When I dropped out from my legal studies, that was the only attempt that I had done in trying to get Yorugu certification. I'm not talking coloniality here, I'm talking colonialism. When you say coloniality, you're talking about a colonial template, as though we are only left with the template and it has been emptied with the content. I'm talking about white invasion, terror, violence, because that is what it is, and it continues incessantly, to be meted out. Africa, under these dislocating conditions, is virtually guaranteed to remain in perpetual subservience to the anti-African imperialist agendas of this world, under cognitive domination by white people. Cognitive domination, which is a precursor to physical domination, which has almost become an autopilot. The latter has almost become an autopilot because of the strides that they have made in the former, and that is cognitive domination. The power to define still lies with white people. Earlier in my presentation, I mentioned the fact that we are victims of epistemicide. We speak from the epistemic content that fosters the disorientation of our consciousness. We speak from that position of dislocation when we speak. That definition that you are talking about, in a rainbowist political system and culture, it actually supports the rainbowist hegemony that we are under, which in my view has to be obliterated completely. It is one of the you are actually pointing to a symptom. Why do we have this kind of definition of racism? Who is the master definer? The master definer is either white or an African person who is a surrogate thinker. Because there's also surrogate intellectualism, where you are talking to chocolate-coated white people. They do exist. Actually, they are the deadliest. So, that is why you do have such definitions that are characterized by discoloration. There is bound to be discoloration in these definitions because the intention is to make race problematic appear, insignificant, to dissect, to talk to address. So this epistemic hegemony has to be overthrown. Has to be overthrown. And the second has to be overthrown, and is not going to happen by appealing to the moral conscience of definers. Usurping definers, by the way. And it's so easy, if I live by your definitions, if I live by your conceptual frameworks, your worldviews, your philosophical outlooks, your values, it is so easy for you to be liberal.
Yeah.
Because I am your shadow.
Yeah.
You have nothing to worry about. Who worries about their shadow? So these things are not even going to happen by individual volitions of white people admitting to guilt. It requires an exclusively black space. Exclusively black space, where we occlude anyone who is non-black from the discourse. It is simply in obedience to the first law of nature, and that is self-preservation.
Yes.
Every sensible family does that.
Yeah.
Closes doors when there's a sensitive matter to be tabled. Now, you asked about expropriation. There's an article that I wrote on this. My take was you see, the
Good evening, everybody. I see we have Sister Dinell in the house. Yeah, once again, apologies for that. Yeah, sometimes these technical errors, you can't avoid them. Yeah, I don't want to waste too much time. Sister Dinell will be talking about, excuse me, she'll be speaking to us about African-centered psychology, activating the collective self. Yeah, without wasting too much time, Sister Dinero, are you ready?
Dumelang Baholo, can you hear me? All right.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate it. I had recorded a video. I have some unexpected family obligations. However, because of these technical issues, I thought, let me present something to you. Obviously, the video is much more polished. So I think that can be shared at a later stage if there's anything that I've left out. So I started off by saying in the video that I'm so thankful and honored and grateful to be invited into this sacred healing space. I feel that these masterclasses are needed in order to facilitate a different kind of thinking about our respective topics. Of course, I'm talking about African-centered psychology. I am a trainee psychologist currently, and my training and my lived experience has really brought me to this place of wondering, what does it mean to practice psychology on the continent with African people? Who are these African people? And, you know, how do we make psychology accessible to our people? I think before all else, we need to describe who is African. We constantly have these debates, Baholo. And others will say, I was born on the continent, so I'm African. And for this particular discussion, when I say African, I'm meaning people who are indigenous to this land. So I suppose it would be us who would tick the black box. There are other schools of thought. However, as I say, for this particular discussion, I'm speaking about Black people. And of course, African-centered psychology means different things to different nations. So again, I really want to focus on South Africa in particular. I think a lot of our people, when they think about psychology, when psychology comes to mind, they think about depression, schizophrenia, crazy people. Other things that come to mind are medicine, pharmacology, sitting somewhere in a room talking about your problems, and now I don't have problems. That's often what one encounters in these spaces. And yet, bulwetsi, illness, when it relates to psychology, is only one aspect of it. And it is linked to a particular worldview, in my opinion. And also this conversation that we are having is about my personal reflections, my lived experiences, and also what other authors have written about, which has influenced my thinking. There is a list that I created of these individuals. They may not be psychologists in training. However, they've laid down this foundation for me being able to identify as an African psychologist. Further to this, I come from a family of medical doctors, different specializations, and as well within my lineage, so me being in this space within this profession of psychology, it isn't a random happening. I feel that it was meant to be. And also coming from these different lineages of the West and the old school, it isn't a surprise as well that I see not just with these eyes, but also with spiritual eyes. And this gift of being able to see beyond the physical has really allowed me to introspect and to look deeper than many of my colleagues who are strictly Western trained, because psychology in this country, generally speaking, still has a strong Western outlook. And this is something that I really want to change in future. Nevertheless, I am this conduit that must make sense of these different views and try be a bridge to connect these old ways within the context of modernity, because I do feel that no one should be left behind. We no longer are the kind of people, I think, who should be leaning towards lamenting and crying and shouting out about the fact that, you know, we are no longer living the way that our ancestors did. We have to accept that this is where we are in the here and now, and to do our best to remember who we once were. So I want to start off this class by quoting Prof. Ramose. He doesn't like to be called Prof, but in any case, here we go. I propose to speak freed from the religion called science. This religion imposes discipline with regard to what may be asked, how that which can be said or written should be done, and why it should be done or said, as well as where and when things may be said. The result is that it often allows the presentation of partial truths as whole truths. Obedience to this religion without protesting it is tantamount to slavery, close quotes. And this really, for me, is what African-centered psychology does, first of all, fundamentally so. It is to say we are moving away from this Western worldview of how we look at ourselves, for one. You know, when we talk about psychology, I think wherever you go in the world, probably most people associated with Sigmund Freud. You know, we throw around these phrases that were developed by his theory, phrases like, oh, you're projecting, you're deflecting. That one, how can I say, it has defense mechanisms, or, you know, that sort of language that we use. You have an oral fixation as another popular one, or your anal retentive. Specifically within South Africa, if we're going to talk about fathers, we also cannot forget to mention the father of apartheid, Verwoerd. Because Verwoerd himself was a psychologist. In as much as he was not a child of the soil, he was not born here, still he was the mastermind. We continued this legacy anyway that we're going to get into, of basically suppressing and depressing our people. And as a result, too, it's not a surprise that when people say go to a psychologist, a lot of our people are weary, because also we know that Black bodies have been used as experiments for a very long time. Psychology as a study of the mind, study of the psyche, the inner workings, has been used to commit what is called epistemic violence against so-called natives. And this epistemic violence basically is the destruction of other people's ways of living. And in our case, the African system and way of life. So unless you're a rebel rouser, or you've been exposed to critical thinking where you ask, where does this come from? You would be fooled into thinking that, you know, Black life is the way that it's been narrated to us. You know, having been in school pre-94, before the history books were rewritten, you know, you'd read about these great men, Bo van Riebeeck and Da Gama, you know, and they came and they discovered our lands, and hey, they discovered these half-naked people who just, you know, made no sense. They spoke the strange language. They didn't have any architecture. There was no written language, no commerce, no intellect, no nothing. We were, in some cases, viewed as these people who just tilled the land, believed in demons, and were half human as a result. And of course, this narrative is problematic. This narrative is also a distraction from the master plan. So we need to go back in time to understand how this came about. We know that as South Africans, we were colonized in 1652, and obviously that's not when the history of our people began. This is just someone else's narrative. This is someone else's story. This colonization of South Africa and other countries in the world was part of a bigger scheme by 5 nations in Europe who changed the trajectory of our collective history as indigenous peoples around the world. This topic is written a lot by Ramon Grasfugel, who is a big speaker on decoloniality. And his writings will talk about how, you know, this mission was sanctioned by, I believe it was the Queen of Spain and the Catholic Church at the time. You know, Europe is a very small continent. If you look at it on a map, it's tiny compared to Africa as a continent. And Europeans have been at war with each other for a very long time. So anyway, these rich nations came together and said, you know, in order to get along with each other, we need to expand. We need to see what else is out there so that we don't kill each other. And so people like Christopher Columbus were sent off to explore these other lands. And what was noted was, look, if you encounter any people there, please assess to see if these are actual people. Assess to see if they are like us, right? Because whiteness is the objective measure of what is good. And so feedback that they got said, hey, these half-naked people, the no architecture, the no written language, but whom they worship gods. I mean, they appear to be like animals. That was the key word, because Grosfugel speaks about there being this line. It is the line of human. And anyone else who is not human, obviously is subhuman, living below the abysmal line. And thus you can then rationalize mistreating, abusing, raping, killing, disposing of people. Let's not forget about manipulating people, because you somehow still need to get these people to do your work. And so Christendom, which is not the Christianity of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, who talked about love and peace. Christendom was this bastardized version of Christianity used for economic gain. And it was used to convert people, because perhaps, you know, you can sell it to the natives that, well, you know, if you convert, we could consider that you are human. And so some people converted, hoping that they would be spared. And then later the narrative was, but actually your ancestors weren't even Christian. So you still live below this abysmal line. And over time, as we know, this led to the destruction of the very fabric of these indigenous societies. This was done in many different ways post the killing and the slaughtering of those who put up a fight. It was done through legislation. You know, for example, having to pay tax for land. Oh, you don't have money to pay this land tax. Well, you'll have to come and work for us, and we will pay you what we think is fair, which of course is next to nothing. It's part of the master plan. This is, I guess, what some people would call reverse psychology. Now, aside from that, as I say, you have to do away with the people who refuse to comply. And ultimately, over time, you eradicate, do away with, and erase people's collective memories and histories. Thus, I've said before that we have forgotten who we are. Specifically, in my case, in my family, there was a division where you would have those who still believed in the old ways, but of course, cannot operate freely necessarily. So perhaps they need to go into hiding or they're sent away. Then on the other end, you have those who are completely modern, who want absolutely nothing to do with these old ways. And somewhere in between, there is this other group. And this obviously has an impact on how we see ourselves as Africans, right? Because again, you've been told we're not good enough, and you keep aspiring to the standard of whiteness, this objectivity, which is a trap because there's no universality in that. We don't, because of our different histories, we could not be the same. Because of our genome, we are not the same. I think the one thing that is clear too in this analysis of our past, our collective past, is that generally speaking in the West, there is this individualistic view, what can I get? What can I get out of this? As opposed to with indigenous peoples, collectivism, hutusana, to help each other. But we will come to that at a later stage. Now, going back to what I mentioned about people being separated from each other and how the master plan brought us to where we are, where we've forgotten who we are. We have other historical events like forced migration and the creation of the homelands. How is it that people are expected to thrive? If we were to use, let's say, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the very bottom of that pyramid, it says that we need some basic needs to be fulfilled in order for us to excel, to self-actualize, to really live our best lives. We need to be safe. We need to not feel that we are in danger. We need to not be terrorized consistently. We need to not be traumatized. How do we expect people to self-actualize when day in, day out, this is what is happening to them? Then think too about later on in life, the liberation struggle, where you had whole groups of people, again, missing young people. In a different time, in a different place. Visualize with me a ladder. You know, you step up, 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 up. And this is a metaphor of growing up. At the bottom of the ladder, we would have our babies. At the top, we would have our elders. And obviously in between, you walk your way up in life. And I imagine a time where to be an elder, it means you have experienced life. It means there are things you have seen along the way that perhaps those who are coming after you have not yet encountered. And part of the beauty of being in relationship with people of different ages is being able to get these different perspectives on life. Now, how do you again expect communities to thrive when there are whole groups of people missing? For me, it isn't a wonder that our society as Black people is as mixed up as it is, because In some cases, old people never had to experience youth, or they never experienced youth for that matter, because they were just trying to stay alive. And now that they can, now that they are no longer persecuted, then we also need to consider the impact of intergenerational trauma on Black people in this country. As I said, this is not something that's unique to us as South Africans, but for the discussion, this is where we are. Think about physical discipline, right? You know, there are all of these stories about how, you know, in our day, you know, we would be whipped and hit and switched, shoes thrown at you, everything. And, you know, you think, yo, that's a lot. There's a lot of force coming my way. And I've had stories relate to me where it's clear that it's not what you were doing. It's not that you stole that peach from that tree. The lady who is manhandling you has so much unfinished business, so much psychic trauma that she is now unleashing all of it on you. Church people like to talk about generational curses. For me, that is the crux of it, intergenerational trauma. It's not necessarily a spiritual thing. It's not necessarily that someone, you know, it could very well be that there are these traumas that have just not been ever spoken about. And perhaps that lady needs to be a strong Black woman in order to get by. And there you are fooling around, triggering her unknowingly, Akir. I think too about what the TRC was proposed to do, right? To give space to specific people to show remorse, perhaps, for their actions. And for that, I'm going to say I'm waiting for part 2, because I believe there's a part 2 that is coming in terms of retribution. However, I know that there are places like Freedom Park where groups of people, Sangwomas, others, have performed rituals in order to try and heal these collective wounds that we share as a nation. And for me, Kilidineo, one of the things I wish we could have done is for all of us to have been paired together, different nations, different races, others would say, different colors, others would say, ages, locations, and we would sit and talk about how this forced separation has impacted us. I wish, because as Credo Mutwa alluded to in his great book, Indaba, My Children, this lack of being vulnerable, this lack of opening up leads to us being closed-minded and being in denial about what is actually going on. And so some people then develop this thing of, turn the other cheek, Mus. That's what needs to be done. And yet, sometimes all we need to do is to have a conversation in order to exorcise our collective demons. So I think now that the history lesson is done, you probably realize then that psychology, specifically African-centered psychology, is quite a complex matter. And as I said, depending on where you are located, it may have specific components that may not be found in other nations. However, the one thing that ACP wishes to do is to do away with the way that we've been conditioned, thinking that West is best, when our own ways of healing, our own ways of bringing to the light that which hurts have been good for us. You know, the West has this preoccupation on cures, right? So this elimination and relief of symptoms of diseases, conditions, you know, the sense of brokenness, Whereas healing is not necessarily about all of this. For me, it's about becoming sound. It's a holistic approach. It's about striving towards being whole again, towards reaching some kind of equilibrium. In African belief system, as I've mentioned before, it's not just about the physical plane. There's also the mind, there's the spirit. We live in this realm, obviously, where we can touch and feel things. Then, there's that which we cannot see with these eyes. There are our angels, our ancestors, this godly figure. And of course, there are dark forces too. Bring that to a Western trained psychologist and see what happens. See how potentially, if you arrive at the wrong place, you may find yourself like your ancestors being demonized. So we as Black psychologists, I feel, really need to hold space because we've gone to school. So we need to bring forth the collective history of our people and looking at them within their specific context, within their families, what they have experienced. It is a culture-based treatment too, because you don't want to make suggestions to a client that don't make sense to them, right? If, let's say, bringing back the matter of the spiritual, someone is telling you that they feel they've been bewitched, are you going to say to them that they are delusional? Maybe they are delusional. I mean, I don't know. I'm just making an example. However, we need to be able to suspend our beliefs, this Western belief that West is best. We need to consider the use of values in therapy. I mean, we speak so much about Botho, Ubuntu, yet there are other values, siriti, dignity, kopano, the coming together, because truly we are in this world together. Motuke motukabatu. I am a human being because of how we interact, right? It's not just, as I said, about the giving. It's also about what I get from that relationship. We also need to consider how Black people think, how Black people act, how it may be difficult, as I said previously, to self-actualize within this particular context if you don't fit. We talk a lot about things like Black tax. How did this thing of Black tax happen? Whereas before, in other generations, people used to just give because that was what was done. Even if that person could never pay you back in kind, by them excelling in life, perhaps by them paying it forward. That was Botho. And yet now we have these issues of entitlement. We have these issues of our people becoming dependent on the state and giving up and giving into that learned hopelessness, helplessness, and powerlessness. Baholo, we need to be wary of that. We really, really, really do need to think about how we can help our people excel in life. And sometimes taking care of yourself as an individual means that it has a ripple effect on your relationships with others, with your friends, family, colleagues, within other interactions, even if you leave this land and you travel, even there, by you being at peace, other relationships can also be at ease. And so this holism that I've mentioned is based on the lived experience, right? Which is why sometimes people struggle with adapting to this privacy orientation of the West. At the same time, because we are Black people living within the context of modernity, sometimes we struggle too. We don't quite know what to do and where to go. And so as an African-centered psychologist, I need to be aware of being a human being, being humane, caring, having compassion, being gentle, respectful, and empathetic, and also teaching that to the other. So truly, going back to what Ramos said, African-centered psychology is a revolt against these rationalisms of mainstream psychology. That's really what it is. We really need to be awake, not be woke, be awake, be present, and to question everything, because there isn't just one reality, there are multiple realities. And so one last point is that the cooperation, between ourselves as African-centered psychologists with others is a very crucial meeting of minds that needs to take place. We need to be able to give voice to those who cannot speak for themselves. Those who, as I said, may just be told, you are crazy. So in any case, Baholo, I think let me stop here. I don't want to eat into the other speakers' time. I already have. So with that, I thank you for your patience. Thank you for participating, and I wish you well.
Thank you very much, Sister Dineo. Interesting stuff. I have never, ever. It's very interesting. I don't know. Do we have time to take questions? Sister Sheena?
We don't have time in that sense, but we could just give people an opportunity. Yeah, but maybe make it two questions, 3 questions.
Okay, 2 or 3 questions before we move on to the brother Itu. Any questions? Okay, we have a hand up. Kele Abetsu. Kele Abetsu.
Dumelang Bagolo.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Sister Dineo, for your presentation. It's taken the loneliness out of being a Black person doing psychology, because you sort of feel like you're doing something that is foreign. But I am wondering if our solution maybe our solution to our maybe psycho-spiritual problems, can it not be found in some of the rituals that are performed by sangomas? Like you said, sometimes people say that they are bewitched, but the problem is in the generational traumas. So could it be that maybe in those rituals that used to be done together with your family, because normally people, when they went to a sangoma or kongakeng to consult and to find healing, they would go with a family member or two just to have support, just to have a connection. Could it be that we could look into those rituals to find solutions to some of the maybe psychological problems that we are facing today?
Well, as a fellow practitioner, that we are governed by the HPCSA and that it limits our scope of practice in terms of what we can do in the consultation room. However, what we can do, I believe, is to investigate what is the issue. Is it simply, as I said, a psychological matter? Is it a family matter, as you were saying, pertaining to this intergenerational trauma? Or is it simply within the realm of bongaka? And that's where we need to educate ourselves. We need to be learned. And we also need to have partners in those other healing spaces to say, you know, I have this client, this patient, this issue has come up, and I feel that this issue does not have an organic cause. This is a spiritual matter. Can I please refer the client to you for further assistance? And that way we can work together as practitioners respectfully and not overstep where we shouldn't.
Okay, we have another hand, Brother Rovico. Okay, I don't know what happened there. Okay, Abudi.
I'm trying to get some light. Thanks so much for the opportunity, and my sister. Wow, such a powerful presentation. My question is on my sister. Do you think we are going to get anywhere into the, I mean, like in the future, successful when we are still communicating the language of the oppressor? We are talking and we are planning to decolonize, to free our minds, to free our young ones, to free ourselves. But now our secrets, we don't have anything confidential. Our secrets, our secretness
We seem to have a bad connection there.
Perhaps Abuti Roviko can switch off his video. Maybe it will make his connection better.
The mission, you know, is that we want one day to see Africa.
Okay, I think we lost our brother there. I think any further questions? Okay.
Can I answer the first part that I heard about language?
All right.
For me, when it comes to decolonization, it starts with the mind. It starts with, as I say, remembering who you once were. So you need to be able to differentiate what is your stuff and what belongs to the other, because we have been othered for so long. Then to language, whose language? Because I mean, I speak a number of languages, but in this country, I mean, there are 11 official languages. So I think that in and of itself, we need to figure out how that can be done, possibly. Again, that I think is for cultural experts as well to latch onto. However, let us start with the mind so that we also don't discriminate against others, you know.
Okay. Thank you, Sister Dineo. I think, can we take one more, Sheena?
I think Abuti Titaba had his hand up.
He's had his hand up, yes. Okay, Abuti Titaba, your question?
Thanks. No, let's say the fine. I'm glad that you touched that part. The psychology, or can I say the academia psychology, does it includes or excludes spirituality? And that's my first question. The second one is that in practicing of psychology, they will speak about psychosomatism and psychosis. So my interest is in psychosis, the loss of reality. So when these people encounter the loss of reality, then re tlo ba bona nkare ke mahlanya. And someone said, some of the solution maybe might be sitting with a traditional healing tools to resolve these issues. And so on that regard, I'm asking that, is it psychology in depth or by its roots? Not the practicing one or the academia one, but psychology itself. Is it not really a base or a root or a foundation of spirituality? The third one is that also, if you are in a journey of maybe looking for some resolution in psychology, or you are currently investigating further, please, I would like to be part of that. Ke a leboha.
Ke a leboga, Papa. I must confess, I forgot the first question. I was paying attention to the others. You asked about psychosis, and then the last one was about if one wants to consult with a psychologist. I see there's been a comment that we can speak, further questions can be asked on our WhatsApp group. So I think that one, let's chat about it on WhatsApp. In terms of psychosis and psychology and spirituality, the psychology is a broad field. There are some schools of psychology that speak to psychosis, not necessarily that a person wahaf or what's. It may be that they're spending too much time in a particular place. It's difficult to answer this question without making reference to a particular school. So if you want to read further and specifically about Western psychology, then Carl Jung is a Western psychologist who speaks about that a lot. And even as I say, we need to be able to differentiate between what is true madness and what is simply a gift that is not really harming anyone. The first question I don't remember, unfortunately.
Okay. The question in my first question was my first question was no, it's fine. I will type it if I remember it correctly.
Okay. Thank you very much for your questions. I guess we'll continue that in the WhatsApp group. Thank you very much, Sister Dineo. Very interesting stuff, very enlightening. I guess now we move on to our next speaker, Brother Itu. Brother Itumele Makale. Brother Itumele Makale is an independent African sovereignist, race vindicationist, scholar, writer, and a musician. His public works and current projects include Up You Mighty Race, a book, currently working on 2 literary projects, namely 1.1, Unshackle, Stepping on Toes, a case for the reorientation of African consciousness, and 1.2, Psychology, the African Indigenous Paradigm. Another work of his is featured in a Cool Affair Records produced album, Detox, GTEBHB, which stands for Give the Enemy Back His Bullshit. Currently working on a music project called 7 Chambers of a Vintage Soul. with the record label Ansuka T Productions. And third project, a visiting scholar at Virginia Commonwealth University, lecturing to the advanced undergraduate sociology class under the topic on the syllabus called Forging Cultures of Resilience. Brother Itumeleng, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready, my brother.
Tumelang abuti itu lekai.
Raphela le kae? Ngweso.
Re tsogile. Le ka thoma abuti.
I don't know if ke a tlhagella mo.
No, looks like video how it timile. Ra go bona yaanong.
Peace and love to you, family. Lesedi, Khanya. Let me first, provide a thumbnail sketch of the scope of, my work, so that you follow the presentation with an insight, an understanding of the paradigm that informs this particular subject that I'm going to be presenting on. While other people's scholarship has for decades been about critiquing systems of the world which does not even encapsulate in its functioning, which is actually a dysfunction, which does not encapsulate, in its functioning, the African essence, and thus rendering the African dysfunctional, a world that must be ended. My scholarship is focused on the recreation of an African with an illuminated spirit to recenter themselves back to the very power of their being in order to create and build a world that is in consonance with their essence. So this is the scope, this is the nature, the scope, and the extent, of my work. And then this lecture's topic, reorienting the African consciousness, heralding the return back to the former African glory. Lest we become, assuming throughout the presentation, either on my part or on the part of the audience, that there's a common understanding of words and concepts that are being used. I felt I should first get on, defining the key, words, which are doorways to concepts that are going to be used throughout the presentation, or concepts which are the paradigmatic, framework, of, the presentation, in its entirety. And I feel we must first define what consciousness is. In my definition, of course, based on my own meditation, understanding, as, imparted by what my experience radiates, and what energies, other life forms are emitting to me that I'm interfacing with in this indivisible duality with the universe that I understand individuality to be about. I define consciousness as the perception plane in a person from which a person looks with meaning and understanding at themselves inside out, in all their dimensions and their surroundings. That is the natural, that is the surroundings now. The natural, the spiritual, the cultural, the social, the economic, the legal, the political, and so on and so forth. And how these ecologies affect them, as an inseparable part of them, and how they affect, how they themselves are affected, also. Now, consciousness can further be said to be the illuminated understanding of objects of awareness, possessing the minds of people with culturally defined and pertinent thoughts, emotions, tastes, values, forming an all-encompassing sense that we call in my language, the language that I speak, from my Basotho people who raised me, all-encompassing sense that we call kutlo. And by kutlo, the English word hearing here is not an adequate rendition of what we mean by kutlo. But kutlo is an all-encompassing sense. So meaning consciousness uses all the senses from the whole, being of a person, all the senses, providing it with coordinates in order to fashion out comprehension vis-a-vis, its object of perception. So this is how I define consciousness. And this definition I also share in the work, my current literary project called Psychology, the African Indigenous Paradigm. So since the topic is about what has been done to African consciousness, it is also of paramount importance that we, based on the definition that I have, provided, we unpack the intricacies of consciousness in terms of what consciousness contains, because consciousness should surely be in its intricacies working through contents. So consciousness has contents. So this I learned in the work of Dr. Amos Wilson, that I found to be so much in resonance with my meditation, and understanding of what consciousness is. His work, called Falsification of African Consciousness. So then it further intensified my understanding that a person's plane of existence, where they are with their life right now, is determined by the state of consciousness they are in. That means your consciousness prefigures your capabilities. The lower the level of your consciousness, the lesser and insignificant the capabilities. So consciousness is therefore, in terms of, what is depicted in the unpacking, that is, in Amos Wilson's work, is composed, or comprised of three elements. And firstly, it has contents, which would be knowledge, perceived knowledge, suppositions, opinions, conditioned emotions, behavioral orientations, unconscious drives, and motives. These would be, the contents, of consciousness. And another element of consciousness from the contents themselves is the apparatus, of consciousness that entails methods of information processing, and that is instrumentalities of reasoning. This is an element of instrumentalities of reasoning. Now, you think about what you know, suppose, and feel. And you organize what you know to try and solve a particular problem in this particular element of consciousness. Methods of information processing, instrumentalities of reasoning. And also in this particular element or aspect of consciousness, you act from it in terms of what you believe. You use logic, critical analysis, deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, conceptual thinking, looking at what is happening in the world and extracting, the rule, and even put the rule in an equation. Minus X plus Y, and intuition, and so forth and so forth. And the third element, in the Wilson depiction, of the composition of consciousness is the directional aspects. Consciousness has to have directional aspects. Here, Amos Wilson says that there has to be a reason for knowledge. By this, he means that you organize knowledge to satisfy a particular need, value, or wish. So people who control other people would most significantly and potently do so by controlling that other people's consciousness. So, and then I provide my add-on, to Amos Wilson's work, of unpacking what consciousness entails, to also, include cosmology, which is another aspect of consciousness orientation to life. Cosmology of a people must be given regard, when it comes to orientation of such people to life. So cosmology of a people, I say, is not to be abstracted to culture neutral universalism, which, is in fact false universality. Other people, imposing their own notions, of objectivity through their hegemonic, epistemologies and academically approved truth, from whence different areas of practice, ensue, plagued with distortions, gross misdiagnosis, to problems that these hegemonic epistemologies, are inherently, about perpetuating, because they were not created from a knowledge stream that flows from the essence of African people and consciousness that radiates it. So cosmology, then the consciousness of African people, I maintain, cannot therefore be dissected, examined, and understood outside of the African cosmology. And then what is cosmology? What is cosmology? I will share with you now the definition of cosmology as provided by Ra, Nefer Amen. Ra Nefer Amen. Okay, before I go there, there's a question that I've just, read from Brother Didab, but Brother Didab has just asked, what is knowledge? Knowledge is the output end of that which you have acquired, that places you in alignment with all that makes your living meaningful, in enhancing and sustaining life. So that's how I understand knowledge and how I would define it. So that is knowledge. Those outlooks, those concepts, those experiences that places you in alignment with the mechanics and chemistry of life, for you to live life as nothing else but itself. So that is knowledge. You have knowledge when you possess within you anything that to meaningfully help you convey life in enhancement and sustaining of all that supports life in terms of its mechanics and chemistry. That would be knowledge, and it has to be verifiable. It has to be verifiable. And there would obviously be different, ways of knowing, different, levels of knowing, and different dimensions, with different ways of acquiring knowledge in dealing with those particular dimensions. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach to knowing, that can help. For a sincere, diligent, person who is geared up at acquiring knowledge. The dimension that the knowledge a person seeks to acquire must be understood, must be known, so that your reasoning instrumentalities in acquiring that particular knowledge, or your spiritual coordinates, if it's a beyond earth dimensional space within which you'd be acquiring that knowledge, has to have clearly and properly defined coordinates, to guide you in that regard. So I was still with, cosmology. So Ra-Un Nefer Amen defines cosmology as having two fundamental goals. First, he says it provides ordered, unified, or synthetic view of what is the highest good, what is man, and the forces that administrate and sustain the world. No understanding of subject can take place without an ordered and unified presentation of its whole and parts. Second, he says, cosmology, like all blueprints and maps, provides a framework that guides thinking and actions through vast array of seemingly unrelated life situations to the successful identification and attainment of the goal of living. Cosmology achieves by this, it achieves this by showing how events in a person's life are integrally related to his or her destiny. So this is the function of cosmology. And this is how cosmology becomes part of the base material that goes into what consciousness has to be coordinated, on. Values. I went on to also, provide another add-on to what consciousness entails, and that is values as our consciousness orientation. And I define values as the barometer through which the good and the bad, the core and the peripherals, what we need and what we don't, are established, measured, and determined. Meaning, as African people, we should know and be in agreement on what is good for Africans, what is good for us, and what is not good for us. So now this is the function of values, and ensuing from a collective sharing of such would obviously be developing a value system, with unified, consciousness as informing the paradigm through which that particular system would be conveyed. While we are still on values, I go on to say values inform aspirations. Aspirations are the yearnings that impel you to produce goods and render services that seek to satisfy the tastes that the values you embrace psych you up to develop. If you embrace European cultural values, you will pursue things European. You will pursue things European in nutrition, science of mating, clothing, entertainment, education, spirituality, etc., etc. Tastes are created through the power to define and are developed through a pattern of consistent practice. There has to be a pattern of consistent practice. Tastes are also linked to interest. We need a value system. I have, earlier on alluded to this. We need a value. We need, to have clearly defined values wherein we have, a common understanding on what is good for us as a people. So for that, we need a value system that will curb tastes that would incline us to aggrandize gigantic appetites to acquire more than we need. So you have capitalism today, which I don't see as fundamental to our oppression, or rather at the root, of the problem that beset African people. It's because it's a system through which dominion, in which we have no sane, independent, and functional and productive presence, and this is the kind of dominion that is being maintained. So capitalism is just placed to systematize that kind of a dominion. It's not dominion itself. We have to understand the dominion not in terms of what is observable, and not in terms of what systems are put in place, but in terms of what it stands on. So it's a system through which a dominion in which we have no sane, independent, functional, and productive presence. And this is the dominion that is maintained. It is a system that finds its legitimacy in a climate of disunity, wherein competition is evoked as a drive for participation in sharing, resources. The psychodynamics of our existence are conveyed on wheels of falsified and controlled consciousness. And this guarantees that we remain social, political, ontological isolates and economic disposables of other people. We have in us a psychospiritual software through which our cooperation with our oppression is psychomechanically obtained. This is the problem that we first have to disrupt and uninstall, I maintain. How are we to conduct ourselves in relation to resources and ourselves in respect of accessing them and utilizing them in the Abantu sense, as predicated on Isintu, which emphasizes collective and cooperative engagement with the ecosystems. This is by acceding to the requirements of Isintu Boto, which requirement, is that, in all spheres of life as Abantu, and not as competitive individuals who define their success by ambition, which actually means ambition simply means, stepping on everybody's head in order to get what you want. And this is one of the glorified, virtues in, the left-brained, segregative mind that hegemonic, epistemologies are centered around. African people do not need to ache their heads and agonize their souls in order to get what they want. African people do not need to ache their heads and agonize their souls. European leftist social communist theories are doing nothing but reducing humans, to mere economic forces. And thirdly, let's look at orientation and disorientation of consciousness, then, which now comes to the core or the crux, of the topic itself. I deliberately use the word orient in disorientation, reorientation, given the Latin root meaning of the word being orior, from whence the word orient is derived. It has got nothing to do with the East and the Asiatics, because they are called Orientals. But the term orient in its root meaning has to do with rising, orior, as per the Latin root. We have the word oroha in my Sesotho language, which means to arrive. Then you would understand from this, as words are gateways to concepts, that our movement was always in ascending rhythms and patterns. Arrival was always an apex point of the ascending movement. We ascended in everything we do until we were subjected to colonial debasement, where we started hoteohela, meaning going down. you need not be an underground worker, of any industry to be saying that. So when you are disoriented is when you are removed from that which gives you the impetus to rise. The East is called Orient because it is where the sun rises, but Orient has got nothing to do with the geographical direction or location. It has got everything to do with rising. Consciousness, if you study the science of being and learn the distinction between the self and the being, you will know that consciousness is nothing else but that part of your being that knows, that part of you that understands, that part of you that is aware, as per the definition of the Honorable Ra Unnefer Amen. Consciousness is that part of you that knows, that part of you that understands, that part of you that is aware. So this means consciousness has content, as earlier on, explained, it has content. This is to buttress what, has already been explained. You disorient a people's consciousness by feeding it or by exposing it or foisting upon it the content that is irrelevant, the content not giving credence to the essence of the person whose consciousness that is. You disorient their consciousness by feeding it with an irrelevant content. This is what has been happening, and this is what my brother Velim Bele refers to as epistemic terror, that we are continuing to be plagued with as African people. Any institution that is established on the basis of epistemic terror is illegitimate. And as far as I know, since our invasion with the incursion of Europeans and all the institutions and systems that they established to run those institutions, the knowledge stream that they have, always had, their institutions and systems running them, being, the base, for that, is the knowledge stream that is diametrically opposed to the knowledge stream that, grounds the very essence of our being as African people. And we get educated in what these hegemonic, epistemologies that, whose curricula, in whose curricula, we get to study, various disciplines they call them. And we get educated in these things. And after being educated in these things, we experience the spiritual dissonance and become rude awakening to the problematic, of relevance, like the struggles, with the dislocation that, as our sister Dineo in her presentation, before I came in, was sharing. What was sharing, is the perfect exemplification of this spiritual dissonance that I'm referring to, because this is the end product of being, educated with the content that removes your consciousness, or that takes your consciousness off, its cosmological axis, and thus rendering you dysfunctional, in all, spheres of life, and its dimensions. Because now you convey your life with a content that does not have in you vibrations that, find resonance, with it. That does not have in you the oil to which it will become a fuel, for illumination. Because ultimately it is your spirit that has to get illuminated in order to send coordinates to all parts of your being, which function, inextricably, which function holistically, which function in different dimensions, whose distinctions and separations the left-brained Western epistemologists, have only, made, fictitious, distinctions, about. So then if this is consciousness, that I've just explained, what makes consciousness African, or what is African consciousness? And then in this, I reason in my current work, another literary project called Unshackled, Stepping on Toes, a case for the reorientation of the African consciousness. I reason that a person can only lemoha or come to consciousness through a cultural lens and sense, which is called in my language kutlo, not hearing. I'm not talking about hearing. By sense, I'm referring to what in my Sesotho language is called kutlo, where hearing is not only confined to the functions of the ear, and its internal its internal innards, its anatomy, its internal mechanics, but hearing, you hear with your whole being. Kutlo is hearing with your whole being, understanding with your whole being, perceiving with your whole being. That is why you'd hear the elders say, "Ngwano ha utwi." But that would not be translated literally to mean this child has a hearing problem. It does not mean that. By ngwano ha utwi, it talks to a disrupted, being of this child by things that are inhibiting the interweaving of all, the parts of their being, sending coordinates to make this child be in unison and have meaningful, experience with life. And then this would cause to the child a whole lot of problems, and the child will, from time to time, be in trouble or causing trouble, and the elders would say, "Wanoha upi." So kutlo is not literal hearing. So your plane of existence, I'm still talking about what African consciousness is. So your plane of existence, where you are with your life right now, is determined by the state of consciousness you are in. And as such, your consciousness prefigures your capabilities. The lower the level, the lesser the capabilities. Adding, another dimension for emphasis on this subject, in my work published in 2017, Up You Mighty Race, which is my first literary offering, I make the following penetrative and dissective observation. Europeans, though the ethnic minority, remain the majority knowledge producers with knowledge, which knowledge positions them at the hallmark of the power to define, which virtually places them as the barometers of our consciousness, controllers of our thinking, managers of our behavior, and engineers of our society. From the above, consciousness is foreground in a person's cultural suppositions, in a form of values, beliefs, emotions, tastes, interests, etc., and therefore tampering with them by supplanting the knowledge base of these suppositions can only amount to what Amos Wilson calls the falsification of African consciousness. And Wilson, that is Amos Wilson, in dealing with the psychodynamics of colonial domination, argues, and I quote, "Domination as a social fact and situation necessarily reorders the thoughts, feelings, emotions, motivations, values, psychological tastes, and consequently consciousness and behavior of the dominated. The normalization of pathology is exquisitely functional for oppressive regimes. It is for this productive reason that the oppressive white supremacy always attempts to rationalize its oppression of Blacks by normalizing their reactionary, pathological, Eurocentric consciousness and behavior, and simultaneously abnormalizing both the reactionary and pro-actionary, non-pathological and pathological African-centered consciousness and behavior with regard to their social, political, economic functionality for maintaining white dominance. White supremacy is to a large extent founded on the social amnesia of subordinate Blacks," close quote. From this, I further argue that consciousness is the light flame of a lamp that is fueled by the oil of culture and other suppositions, and as such, consciousness is the radiance of peculiarities of a people whose culture it is that it foregrounds. Isintu further requires that governance systems ensures people do not have a schizophrenic relationship with themselves and a strained relationship with resources. A system that does not place people in conflict with their life-defining mores, cultures, and cosmologies. Prosperity should only mean, in terms of Seto, having our resources as enablers for us to fulfill and reach our existential fullness in alignment with our essential nature. So with us, existence and essence are not mutually exclusive. So it is other people's consciousness that has brought a fictitious distinction and separation between the two. Then there are also in the subject of consciousness who I call consciousness transcendentalists or universalists, who say consciousness does not have race and culture. It is cosmic, it is universal. But what they overlook, which oversight could be ascribed to consciousness disorientation, is the reality of different vibrations, rhythms, patterns, idiosyncrasies that different peoples have their different cultures cultivating and shaping them for existential meaningfulness. Consciousness, presented as an abstract universal phenomenon, has often been a tendency of hegemonic epistemologies in their epistemic arrogance, which requires the disorientation of the consciousness of the epistemologically dominated. So you have to believe that crap credulously, gullibly, if you are the epistemologically handicapped. And if you are epistemologically handicapped, your PhD can only be permanent head damage, because you will be living for the reinvigoration and reinscription of your spiritual castration as a person. Consciousness disorientation is the rendering of a person's consciousness to dislocation in a manner that makes them see their essence in obscurity, even your own essence. With a disoriented consciousness, you are made to see in obscurity. it becomes difficult for you to come to the knowledge of self with a disoriented consciousness. Now, knowledge of self lets us know, or lights the torch, for us to know who we are. We are abantu. We are not merely, human. A reoriented consciousness, that is in consonance with, our essence, sheds that light to us for us to know we are more than human. Because umuntu, motu, is not human. These two words are not equivalent. They have two different conceptual genesis. Umuntu is the highest form of life. Human relates to species, but the uprightness that this particular species attains is what makes them motu, umuntu. Now, the African consciousness is the consciousness of Batu. I'm talking about the consciousness of Batu here. And I'm not talking human consciousness. Umuntu is, in my definition, a self-aware human being. Umuntu is not a human being, but a self-aware human being conveying themselves to life in uprightness and wholeness, nurtured to be a free and authentic being. And in being self-aware, umuntu is also aware of the not self properties of their being. Your being has both the self and the not self. It's not only the self is not cardinal to your being. But the self is the center point, from whence consciousness, is punctuated. But the self is not everything about your being. You have the not self aspects of your being, but this is another topic altogether. So their spirit quantum that entails energies, forces, and matter on which consciousness is anchored for its reality or practical application orientation, for substance rendition to that meaning it gives to phenomena conceived or apprehended by the cognitive womb space called kelelo. Kelelo is the cognitive womb space of umuntu, of motu, not the mind. The mind is something that's mechanical. Actually, the mind is not conscious and can never be conscious. The womb of awareness is kelelo. Mind, amaXhosa people called incingo. We call it monahano. And kelelo is that which conceives data for monahano or incingo, which is the mind, this machine or this machination that has been exalted in Western epistemologies as the apex, of understanding. As African people, we have, our own ways of knowing. We have our different dimensions of acquiring knowledge and understanding. So the mind is just an instrument, of cognition and not the womb of awareness that ingqondo or kelelo is. So now the consciousness also has to have a philosophical outlook that it pushes forward or that it exerts to a person and the world in which this person lives for the purveying of their life trajectory, and journey. What informs philosophical outlook? And I say it is your spiritual-cultural foregrounding that shapes and provides coordinates to your concept map. And you may ask, what do you mean by spiritual, quote unquote, spiritual cultural? I haven't heard of such a compound term that you are now introducing. You see, I'm at liberty to use English language unconventionally because I have to use it in such a way that I am able to adequately convey my Basotho conceptualizations. The spiritual cultural, I define as all that centers the being of an African to its root essence and cultivate for its expressions in consonance with it in how an African conveys themselves to life. One word for all of this is Setho. This is the spiritual cultural. Setho, encompasses, both spirituality and culture. That is why you cannot be claiming to be rooted in Setho and talk Jesus, Allah. No, that one I dispute, that one I argue, and vehemently so. It is one of the classic, or the most perfect, examples or exemplifications of consciousness disorientation, because your language has words, has names that the spirit, your essence breathes, gives, to what you must express. So anything that you express that is foreign to what your essence breathes, then spells dislocation and disorientation on your part. I find foreign paradigms decentering and falsifying to African consciousness. Knowledge is created and produced to serve peculiar needs of a particular people. For such needs to be established, thus informing what knowledge is required to serve a people. Such people's worldview, cosmology, values, and outlook to life must be first known and understood. Aloof of this consideration, knowledge produced would only misorient such people's consciousness, with the resultant effect of landing them on a destiny of dislocation and decenteredness relative to the objectives of those who are bent on seeing them remaining in that position of dislocation and decenteredness that would make them accessories and accomplices in their own oppression and annihilation. And this is the last point which would conclude the presentation. Point number 7, reclaiming our indigenous knowledges and developing with them as a separate epistemological stream, independent and sovereign African-centered learning institutions. It is now decades after the formal, quote-unquote, abolishment of slavery and colonialism, yet even today, the quote-unquote academia remains the site of European intellectual hegemony built on historic continuity of a single culture. It is also apparent that the academizing of African consciousness, reorienting epistemes, has reduced such knowledge to an elitist and sterile intellectual sophistry among African scholars, and as such, it has rendered their efforts in knowledge production to non-effect, putting the majority of African people at the margins of much needed community-based conceptual engagements in ways that occlude the possibility of retrieval of an innovation premised on African-centered epistemologies with impetus for their rise spiritually and institutionally with regards to family, community, economy, politics, health, science, and technology. Over the years, history bears witness. Africa has had a plethora of Afrocentric, Pan-Africanist, and Black consciousness scholars produced, endorsed, and accredited by Eurocentric learning institutions, which has arguably not done much for the rising of the masses of African people to a revolutionary impetus-imbued consciousness. There are still no regular African-centered, worldview-based education programs with institutional fullness in African communities, through which knowledge in areas of history, culture, philosophy, spirituality, health, cosmologies, politics, economics, etc., can be disseminated from the African perspective. There is still a grossly misguided notion that if it's academic, it's authoritative. That is a grossly misguided notion, that the African mind with the African consciousness reoriented, must dispel, must occlude, and throw to the rubbish bin of the rubbish bin of the history behind which the current place of dislocation we find ourselves is to be understood. So I'm saying that misguided notion that if it's academic, it's authoritative, we have to get that out of our minds if we are serious about rising and ascending back to our former glory and asserting and manifesting ourselves, having located ourselves and the cosmic harmony through which our vibrations as a people are defined, to assert ourselves, manifest ourselves as sovereigns with intellectual independence and maturity, with that African self-image. So yes, this brings us to the end of my presentation. And I thank Arise Black Child for once again providing me with this opportune moment to come share, truthful meditations, of my spirit with my African family. Peace and love to you all. Lesedi khanya.
Lesedi khanya. Thank you very much, Brother Itumele. That's this was some very interesting stuff. Okay. Psycho-spiritual software, spiritual cultural. Interesting stuff. Definitely something to follow up on. Okay, because of time, we'll be taking 3 questions and
I forgot to mention something else. Sorry to interrupt. I forgot to mention something else.
Okay.
I had planned to prior to the lecture avail the PDF, the presentation in a PDF format to all, but what I will do, I will avail it immediately after this session. I will avail the presentation, on WhatsApp. I will use then our WhatsApp channel to avail it. And yeah.
All right. Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, maybe if we can, by show of hands, anyone who has questions for Brother Idu. Or you can just jump in.
Yeah,
just unmute your mic and jump in.
Good evening, Royals.
Good evening, Brother Tabo.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thanks, Brother Itu, because I wanted to raise a question, but I think Brother Itu has helped to a certain extent to demystify some of these things. But I think, Royals, I think it's important that as we engage, point of reference should always help us to ascend or to return to our former glory. And I think Brother Itu really helped in that regard. And that's the question I wanted to ask Sister Dineo, to say, I hear you, but please take me back where I don't have to use slavery and Babylon's arguments, you know. So I'm saying, Brother Itu, thanks for connecting us with our glory, you know. But equally, the other question I wanted to check, because I sent it on the chat, was to say, now, when you look at our elders in SASO, BCM, AZAPO, and even PAC to a certain extent now, how do you reconcile the issue of Black consciousness, the way it was practiced, and how do you reconcile even the Pan-African philosophy, you know? So, Kura, I just want to understand, I'm even asked to say that those consciousness, what is it tantamount to, you know? What was it? Or it was falsification of who we are? I'll pause there. But thanks for this colloquium. We really thank you.
Oh, can I come in?
If I may first, thank you very much, Chair. Mine is on the hegemony, the Western Eurocentric hegemony that has since entrenched itself in African so-called universities. And looking at the fact that in an attempt to express ourselves based on the level of insight that Ndate Tumeleng has spoken of, we constantly hit a brick wall to an extent that for you to attain the next level of so-called education, you need to conform and, in fact, as you put it, classify yourselves as a subject of the order. Now, what then do we do in the academic space in order to, on the first hand, express ourselves based on how we know and how we see reality, but on the other hand, ascend through the ranks? Because it's quite clear that for you to be elevated from one level to the next, you need to conform and consume much and more of what is being expected by the Western paradigm. So how do we then navigate through that space? Let me pause there. Thank you.
Can I respond?
Yes, I think you may.
Brother, let me first, address a question that was asked by Brother Thabo Matsafu on how, do I reconcile the African consciousness narrative that my presentation has postulated on with the Black consciousness, of the SASO generation, of Bo, Steve Biko, Nchaupe Mokwape, and others. and Pan-Africanism, you know, of Bontate Sobukwe. Then the disorientation of African consciousness vis-a-vis that, and what is it that, you know, I am to say on that. Black consciousness, you know, of the Sasso generation, the Black consciousness of 1968 sprouted out of pure political convictions. Pure political convictions, because one of the consciousness disorientation is making a person one-dimensional. And you can only have your consciousness disoriented if you do not have a paradigm that foregrounds you, you know, in African-centeredness. Pure political convictions which discounted the role of spirituality, the role of culture, you know, in building the anti-Black white terror, you know, hegemony that we still live under to this day. So the Black consciousness of Steve Biko and Pan-Africanism of Sobukwe also has in it elements of African consciousness disorientation. That my discourse is a clarion call, you know, to hash out and correct, you know, through the work, you know, of recentering, through the work of regrounding. It was Black consciousness, but lacking the foregrounding in African-centeredness, because the Black consciousness movement had East Indians, you know, as its leaders, had East Indians, you know, as its stalwarts. You know, East Indians appear in the heroes gallery of the Black consciousness movement. Whatever BCM pocket, you know, you may find today, whether it's Azapo or BCMU or Black Consciousness Party, and the same goes with PAC. Now, misidentification of Abantu, you know, misidentification of the people who supplied the liberation struggle discourse, you know, and narrative was geared at, you know, conceptualizing about, you know, in seeking to find remedies in response to our oppression. In that discourse, they misidentified the people. Consciousness disorientation can make you do that. And they created political Blacks in their politics one-dimensionality, with Black also, you know, including, you know, non-Indigenous people. So this is the hybrid consciousness, you know, from hybridized, you know, understanding of Blackness, you know, in the Biko annotated Black consciousness. Involvement of Indians, which Ndaden Chaupe Mokwape said, the first 2 years of the establishment of SASO, they were at loggerheads with Biko for 2 years, arguing over the inclusion of East Indians in the Black consciousness movement. So the race neutral, coming to Ndate Sobukwe, of the definition of, you know, an African, also, you know, the race neutral definition, you know, of an African itself, you know, spells consciousness disorientation in that outlook, you know, that informed, you know, the views of Ndate Sobukwe. So they were not immune from this consciousness orientation problematic on the part of African people that my presentation was about. And the second question by Brother Mohau on Western hegemonies, you know, in African universities, And, you know, first and foremost, in Africa, there's no African university. You have academic institutions. It's academic institutions, which are institutions that are based on the spell from Greece, on which European intellectual, you know, arrogance, you know, is based. And this is the spell, you know, in the artillery. If you do not see anything wrong with academy or with anything that is called academic, you won't see a need, you know, for de-academizing knowledge creation and knowledge production, because I am the best example of de-academized knowledge creation and knowledge production. What do I mean by de-academized? Removing the paradigm that is a precursor to knowledge creation and production and dissemination that links the recipient of knowledge to Europe's, you know, cream of culture, and that is Greece. The term academia, you know, comes from, you know, from one of the biographists of Greece in antiquity, called Plutarch. The term academia comes from his story of King Theseus, who abducted a girl called Helen, and Helen's brother went out to look for her, and the King Theseus abducted her. And now I want to show you the cultural arrogance that's being exerted here by the very existence of academic institutions on the African soil. Academic has got nothing to do with knowledge creation, production, and dissemination, research, you know, scholarship. This can still be done. We did that outside of that paradigm and framework. So then these two brothers of Helen found her. But how did they find, you know, their sister, Helen? They found their sister because they were given a tip-off by a fellow named Academos, whom they met on the street, that the king is in such and such a place with your sister. And they found her, you know, by the help of Academos. And this Academos became the Athenian Greek war hero. And Plato, whom these hegemonic epistemologies that are characteristic and fundamental to the knowledge stream that is the basis of the academia. Plato, one of the so-called fathers, you know, of their philosophy, named the school that he established in the groves, in the
We seem to have lost Brother Itu. Brother Itu, can you hear us?
Having an impressive academic arsenal is not different from a person who is christened in Roman Catholic Church or baptized in any of the Protestant churches or charismatic churches. Because now, if you are to look at all of this, is streamlined by what is called spiritual castration of African people. I am saying we do not have African universities in Africa. We have academic institutions, by their definition, academic. They are linked to that cultural milieu that produced them. We have our own knowledges, which form a different knowledge stream that in our rise, having heard our consciousness reoriented, we must develop a framework for them through which to gear them up to reaching their fullness by us establishing independent, sovereign, African-centered knowledge production, you know, institutions. So as to what is it that you can do in these universities, because look, the decoloniality discourse in universities, I'll be blunt with you, I'll be frank with you, the decoloniality discourse in universities is Black people in universities who are seeking epistemology, who are seeking to have epistemological Bantu stance established for them in the white terror, epistemological hegemony. They want to have for themselves epistemological Bantu stance established. You can't decolonize a Eurocentric curriculum. Eurocentric curriculum is an instrument of colonization. By decolonizing, you untrap, you uncapture, you reclaim, you bring clarity to distortions. Now, Eurocentric curriculum is inherently not ours and can therefore not be reclaimed. Then to say we must decolonize education in universities is a proposition to do the logical impossibility. You discard the poison. I don't know what is it that people want to do, because our knowledges, are a completely different, stream. There you are dealing with another knowledge stream. I don't know whether people want Kool-Aid, some Kool-Aid epistemology within, this epistemic hell, of white terror that these universities are or not. I don't know. There's nothing, my brother, until we establish our own. That is part of, what fruits of consciousness reorientation, will show by us building our own institutions and accrediting bodies. Because UN Declaration on the Rise of the Indigenous Peoples, Article 14 of that says, the indigenous peoples anywhere else have a right to educational autonomy and teaching, through methods that are appropriate to their cultures. Now, this also talks to methodology, meaning in our culture defines, our own ways of knowing. Assessment, methods, would differ. There can never be a standard education system, that is a matata zonke, unless you want to create a deceitfully colorless world, a deceitful humanity melting pot, in which only blackness burns and everybody else does not burn. So this is what has been created. That's why you want to be, you want to find, your authentic expression epistemologically within a vehicle. That is part of the artillery that is being weaponized against your demise. These institutions are illegitimate. Their existence on the African soil is illegitimate. It is as illegitimate as body politics and polities that you find throughout the African continent. There isn't one African indigenous government on this continent. There isn't one African indigenous school. We do not even have our schools. Even at the kindergarten level, there is no African indigenous school. We cannot decolonize anything in those spaces. Ours is to disengage, stop being accomplices, stop being accessories, and establish our own and declare ourselves as sovereigns. What is it that we are scared of? What is it that we are afraid of? We want to be free, but we are scared of being sovereign. We are scared of asserting ourselves as sovereigns. Then Gavi was right when he said, we are a race of imbeciles, cowards, and good-for-nothings. I want to see this Black Education Masterclass next time, having evolved, having grown, with our help, of course, with my help and the help of those who came forth to contribute content to this program. I want this next time to have evolved, to have developed into a school. This thing of us being part-timers at all times is not going to take us anywhere. We don't even give our all to this thing. Every time there's lectures here, there's lecture series here, we are being invited. Abstracts are not even, requested of us to submit, to check as to whether, the information needs that the program has assessed will be catered for by what I intend to present. We have to start being serious about our knowledges and not confine them to us wanting to sound smart at all times. Some of us are not sticking out our necks here, to be seen and to sound smart, to be given accolades. No, we don't have schools. Universities are part of the plantation, the slavery they are part of the slavery plantation.
Thank you very much, Brother Itu. Sovereignty. Yeah, you said it best. Mobb Deep says, what's that song? No such thing as a halfway crook. So I don't know if, no such thing as a part-time revolutionary, I guess. Unfortunately, because of time constraint, we won't be taking any more questions. We will have to move this to the WhatsApp group. Yeah, I'm sure people have lots of questions. Thank you, Brother Itu.
Peace and love to you, my brother.
Very insightful.
Peace and love.
Much love. Thank you very much. Also, the book suggestions, we'll also send those to the WhatsApp group, suggested readings and all. Yes, and thank you once again, Black family, for being patient with us. It was a rocky start, but it was a very strong finish. Much appreciated. I see Abudi Tawamohala says action time. I like that. Yeah, so that is all for this tonight's presentation. Next week, Saturday, 14th of August, we will have our brother Sipesi Shabalala. He will be talking about Black solidarity. Why is it important to build a global Black Power movement? Yes, please do join us. Hopefully, surely next week we will run much smoother than this. May everyone have a great, blessed night. Thank you.